Hey guys, and welcome to the Fish Room. I'm Rachel O'Leary and it's time for a Tuesday tip. Now, something that you guys ask me a lot is how do I filter my fish room? So I thought this week I would talk to you about my central pump, my closed loop system, as well as some of the decisions I made when I was starting my fish room and some of the mistakes that I made. So I am going to show you how I set it up, what I learned, and how it's progressed. So let's take a look. So we're over here in what I affectionately call the noisy side of the fish room. Now, if any of you guys have ever visited larger fish rooms, you'll know that often the air pump sound is a big issue. And one of the considerations I made when I was planning for my fish room was I wanted, believe it or not, the quietest pump possible. And this one is really pretty quiet. All the bubbles, the dehumidifiers, and the air pump contribute to quite a bit of sound down here, but it's really could be much worse. Now my air pump is up here. It only weighs about 14.5 pounds and runs off 80 watts of electricity. It is an Alita AL80, which is rated for about 100 tanks, give or take, depends on the size of the tank and the depth of the tank. So when you're considering buying an air pump to run a bunch of tanks, you need to think of a few things. How many tanks are you going to be running? How big is your fish room? And how deep will the air have to be pushed? Because that determines what size pump you need. I knew in my fish room, at least when I was starting out, I wanted 3 rows of tanks, and I thought it was just going to be this wall and the main wall. I never expected it to take over the other half of the room. So I deliberately got a very oversized pump. I was planning to run about 40 outlets. What I had to do because of that was I had to put a purge line on. And what that is you don't want too much pressure back feeding to the pump because it'll damage it and affect its longevity. So I had to put a stop pipe down for my central loop with a ball valve that I could let off some of the pressure until all my tanks were set up. Now that can get pretty loud, as I'm sure you can imagine, that constant hissing. So what you can do is run airline to that purge valve in a long line, and that reduces it to a mild hiss. It didn't take long for me to use up enough outlets that the pressure was being used throughout the whole room. Anyway, let's take a closer look at my pump. Now that's all it is. I just stuck it up there because I wanted it out of the way. The nice thing about a lot of these linear piston pumps is that they're rated for indoor or outdoor use. I have block walls down here, so it wasn't particularly convenient to place my pump outside. However, in the planning phases, you certainly could, and then just run your flexible tubing or PVC into the room, and that reduces a lot of the noise. And in fact, if I ever get to build my fish house, I'll have my blower outside rather than inside. Now, linear piston pumps are great because they last a long time. This one's been running for over 8 years, and I haven't even had to rebuild it. On that note, with linear pistons, you can buy a rebuild kit for a fraction of the cost of the pump in case it's ever compromised. They're relatively quiet, they're extremely efficient, and they're small. Now, I told you guys I run my system on a central loop. All that means is I attach to my pump a complete ring of PVC pipe. And what this does is allows the pump to pump air evenly all around the room. Now, I learned a lot when I was setting up this fish room. And on this side of the room, you can see there's lots of dingly-dangly, super long stretches of airline. And that's because I didn't know what I was doing. It works out fine, but I used a lot more airline than I needed to. So when you're setting up your central loop, you need a PVC cutter, you need valves to run your airline, you need airline, and lots of fittings. So I'm just going to show you some of the details and tell you a little bit about what I've learned from setting up this fish room and what I wouldn't do next time. So as I told you guys, when I first set up the fish room, I needed a purge valve, and that's that down pipe there with the valve, and that allowed me just to let off some of the pressure so it didn't backfeed the pump. Initially, I just drew a straight line on the PVC. I elected to use self-threading valves, and these are nickel-plated lever valves. And they're fantastic because you can adjust the actual airflow to each tank, which is important because if you have smaller tanks that are higher up, you need less air than the deepest tanks. You can see I drew a straight line on my PVC and then just drilled a pilot hole and threaded in the taps. Now, these lengths of airline are extremely long and ridiculous. I wasted a lot of money on airline. What I should have done is what I did over here. And what I did over here is I ran a down pipe, and that allowed me to tap at each level for each aquarium. And it's worked out really well. Now, you don't want to provide a bunch of dead spots in your loop, so you wouldn't want to do this for every tank, but it certainly is appropriate for each row of tanks. And I did that on this side of the fish room. You can see all the downspouts. And they connect at the bottom as well to make that, again, a loop. Now, I didn't glue my PVC because if they're fit properly, they really shouldn't need to be. You can see it runs all around the fish room, and that allows me to supply air to every aquarium. And the reason I chose a central loop for my fish room is not only because it's more energy efficient. You figure the vast majority of my tanks are run off one 80-watt pump, but it's also because it allows me to control the environment in each aquarium separately. By driving air to individual filtration, I don't have any cross-contamination between tanks. To me, this is super important. It's also very cost-effective in comparison to running hang-on backs or canister filters on 100 aquariums. Now, there are alternatives to PVC. You can certainly use flexible vinyl tubing. In that case, you'd want to use hose clamps. That way your tubing doesn't blow off. So when I build my fish house, I will certainly do a loop like this again. But I've learned that I can run down pipes for my PVC. I also have learned that it's really much more efficient with the small tanks to run a single airline to a gang valve. And then that way I can control each of those tanks a bit easier instead of having to climb up my ladder to reach the ceiling line. I also learned that you definitely need to mark your PVC. Now, I showed you guys in my first ever Tuesday tip how to use a piece of angle iron or the corner of a stand or even the corner of a wall to draw a straight line. It definitely looks a lot tidier when all your valves are neatly lined up and facing the same direction. This is the nickel-plated Liebherr valve I chose. You can see the airline attaches to one end, and this end here screws into the PVC. Now, as I mentioned, these are self-tapping. They're a little bit more expensive, but to me, it was worth it rather than having to drive a pilot hole, tap the line for each of my valves, tape it, and then screw it in. With this one, I just drilled a pilot hole and was able to screw it in. Now, it screws in till it's firm, but you don't want to over-tighten. And then this valve here allows you to adjust the airflow, which was super nice because for my bottom big 75s, it needs full tilt air, but my top 20 longs need much less air. Now, for my actual filters, I decided to use Porette foam block filters for the majority of the tanks. I went with a coarse PSI because I'm running a lot of tanks, and to be able to maintain sponge filters in all these tanks is almost a full-time job. By going with the coarser foam, it saves me a lot of time because they don't clog up as quickly, and you can tell when they're clogging up because the bubble output gets a lot lower. Now, what I really like best about these sponge filters is that, and you could certainly replicate this easily at home, is that inside the lift tube it's drilled with tons of little holes. And what this replaces the need for an air stone in a sponge filter, and it provides a nice small bubble output, which is quieter and better for oxygen delivery. So your airline hooks on here. This goes down into the sponge. It pulls the water through the sponge. The entire surface is your biological filtration as well as your mechanical filtration. Now, I run 2 at least in each of my 55s and 75s, sometimes 3, and 1 to 2 in my smaller tanks. I use the same size block filter for every tank. At some point, I'm going to convert the fish room, maybe when I build my fish house, to all corner Matten filters because I think they're even more efficient and easier to maintain. Now other thing I did when we were planning the fish room was that we gave the fish room its very own panel. And this was important for a few reasons. I have a generator for power outages, and this allows me to control which breaker is powered from my generator. I prefer to be able to run most of my house as well as my air down here. And this allows me to power down the lights. This is the timer for the lights, which is this breaker, so I can just power that one down, feed my panel, and keep all my air and filters running in the fish room. It's a really good idea if you're running a lot of tanks to have a backup power supply, and a generator is really the way to go. Now, the central timer is not part of the central loop. It was set up for my lighting. I think one of the reasons I have so much success with my aquariums and my plants is that it's really very controlled. By setting up this timer and running boxes all around the fish room that are specific timer boxes, I can really control my light cycle pretty easily. Now, we ran every other box as a timer box, and the ones in between are direct current boxes like you would use if you were running a heater or a UV sterilizer or things like that. And that has been really, really nice. And I would highly recommend, if you're setting up a lot of tanks, to get a central timer and run boxes like that, because it really helps make sure that you keep everything on a predictable schedule, and it also helps with your energy usage. I don't know about you guys. Well, you guys know already, I am extremely prone to forgetting to turn off lights that aren't on a timer. Anyway, I hope that helps and you've gotten something out of seeing how I run my air and central loop system. If you guys are following me on Instagram, you know I asked for advice about that living room tank. If you're not following me there yet, make sure you do, so that you can weigh in on what kind of setup I should put in the living room on my found object stand. As always, thanks for watching. Make sure you stop by my Facebook as well as my website, MsJinx.com, where you can find my upcoming speaking engagements, my current stock list, and information on all things nano. As always, I love to hear from you guys, so let me know below if you have any comments, suggestions, or questions.